We're good? Okay, good evening. I would like to call to order the April 19, 2021 Lake Washington School Board study session. Let the record reflect that all board members are present. It was recently announced that all school districts may begin to hold in-person open public board meetings. However, attendees must pre-register to attend either a board meeting or a study session. And due to limited seating capacity, registrations will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Registrations will be accepted until 1 p.m. on the date of the meeting. And if you would like to attend, please send an email to Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org, and she will confirm your attendance. All attendees will be required to wear a face mask and maintain 6 feet of physical distance at all times. And upon arriving at the Resource Center, the public will be required to check in and follow the attestation process. In addition, board meetings and study sessions will continue to be live streamed and viewable on the district's website. If you are unable to live stream the meeting, you can call 425-936-2813, enter conference ID 37127 to listen to the meeting. We have one item on our study session agenda for tonight, and that is a discussion of the equity policy and next steps. Dr. Holman, will you please get us started?
Absolutely. Thank you for coming back together. I know we did have a professional learning session scheduled for this evening, but with the need to continue our work around the equity policy, operational expectation 14, I'm excited that we get to come back. Diane, I believe you're adjusting the volume there. Thank you. And so in front of you tonight, you do have an updated draft. That draft can also be found on board docs under the April 19 study session. And so that draft is available to the public right now. I did want to just remind us, even though we just went through much of this content last week, just want to remind the board and remind anyone who potentially is viewing this but didn't see it last time we met, just a reminder of really the process and next steps that the board is going through right now. And so to date, the board has met in multiple study sessions as recent as the beginning of April to really start to put some meat on the bones, if you will, around the policy, discussing values, discussing language around the policy. And so tonight really is a review of a subsequent draft based on board feedback at our last study session. The board has participated in professional reading. You've held linkages with multiple stakeholders within the community, and you're continuing to participate in professional learning focused on race and equity through the Puget Sound ESD and their education and their equity and education department. When we think about next steps, it really is around finalizing your draft of OE 14, it should say there, and then moving into linkage sessions to receive feedback around this draft policy, knowing that this policy definitely needs to reflect our board's values as well as our community's values. And so one way the board can help evaluate that is by discussion and conversation with the community. After the linkage sessions, we'll continue with our professional learning. We will finalize the policy, and with a goal of the board adopting an operational expectation focused on equity by the end of this school year, which has been the target throughout this year. And even with all of the additional items on the board's agenda this year, just want to recognize that this has been a priority throughout. And so tonight really is reviewing an updated draft of the policy. I brought you components of the policy last 2 weeks ago and heard from the board. It was a great dialogue, great discussion. And so we all took notes. Diane took great notes for us to then truly dig back into that policy language to really work to provide the board's voice within this policy. And so tonight is about reviewing that. It's about discussion and dialogue as a board. And so I think during our last study session, the board had a good opportunity to discuss, and hopefully tonight we can continue that same opportunity. And tonight is about completing that next step of feedback so that we can finalize the draft policy. And I want to underscore draft because we have all committed to ensuring that community voice is part of this policy. And so you'll see there's a watermark on this document that lists it as draft, and that is purposeful because it will be draft until the board adopts it, and that will be based on community feedback and ultimately board feedback around what you want to see in the policy. And so as we start the discussion tonight, I want to offer a number of reflective questions for the board, and then I will hand it off to Eric to facilitate the conversation, knowing that we went through really component by component. We heard significant feedback all the way from values to content, to how it is written, to the organization of it, all of which is really important to have a well-articulated policy. And so from the conversation and from the work that we have done subsequent to that, a few reflection questions for the board to consider as you're thinking about the evaluation of the draft policy. And so there's 5 questions here just to kind of not only remind us of the feedback that the board brought last time, but just an opportunity to think about this policy. So question 1, does this policy communicate an unwavering stand against racism and discrimination? That was feedback that we heard loud and clear from the board, that you wanted to make sure that this policy truly provided that and communicated that within the policy. I also heard that there was a discussion around calling race out specifically, and so want to make sure that as you review this draft, that items focused specifically around race are addressed in a manner that the board feels is in alignment. Third, does the policy recognize the rich cultural and ethnic diversity within our community? That was a comment, that was a comment Siri made. She said, appreciate the policy, but we live in such a diverse and rich community, and just didn't feel that it was being represented well in the policy statement. So, that's a question that I want to bring back because, we all agree with that and want to recognize that within the policy as well. Number 4, does this policy align with the board's values? And then 5th, does this policy provide appropriate clarity and readability, knowing that not everyone that reads this policy may be as adept or understand language around professional learning and equity and race, and want to make sure that it's accessible to our community. And so those are the reflection questions that I will offer, and I'll hand it off to Eric to facilitate conversation. And again, we will continue to take notes, and really anything and everything is available for comment and feedback within this policy because it is draft.
Okay, so let's work through the reflection questions that are up on the screen first, and then we can maybe, if we don't cover everything section by section, we can then turn back to section by section. But let's try to work through those as a framing device first. So the first question for the board to think about is, does this policy communicate an unwavering stand against racism and discrimination? So that's something we've discussed as a board as a value. So thoughts? I guess it's hard to have this conversation without actually focusing on the language too. So has everyone had a chance to read? And if not, does anyone need a few minutes to read quietly before we have discussion? Anyone need any time? Everyone good? Okay, we'll keep going then. I'll give it a minute. Okay, let's try it this way. We'll have a conversation. So let's just work section by section. We can think about these questions as we go through it. That might be a little bit easier. So the first section of the policy, of the draft policy, is on board values. Does anyone have any comments, questions, input on that section of the? And maybe think about these questions as we're analyzing that section.
I made some edits as I was reading through it the first time, and I'm looking at the third sentence, actually. The board believes that each student has the potential to achieve excellence, learn at high levels, and accomplish significant personal goals, which I agree, but since we're in the business of education, I wondered if it should say academic and personal goals. And I guess I have a thought on the second sentence. It says the board recognizes and celebrates diversity. I feel like we do more than that, and we need to do more than that. I think the board embraces and celebrates.
Yep.
Diversity would be a stronger statement.
In place of recognizes?
Yes.
Yeah. I agree. Director Stewart?
Yeah, you could easily throw in is proud of our diversity. And that covers celebrates, that covers recognizes, that shows that we don't just recognize that group, we recognize the blend and the diversity, and we do celebrate when you say we're proud of,
Okay.
not just acknowledging. And that cuts the words down to the same number of words you had last draft.
I guess what I'm hearing is that everyone's comfortable right now with the values being expressed. I think there's some feedback and maybe expressing them a little more forcefully or clarifying them, but otherwise, we're okay. I have a small nitpick as well, too. So the last sentence, the board is committing to interrupting systemic racism. I would like to change interrupting to ending. When I think of interrupting, it's, somebody's mid-sentence and I stop them for a second and they just continue on. And I don't want to interrupt systemic racism. I would like to end it.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you. Can you move your
Is
mic?
it? Sorry.
Thank you.
It's not the best mask. It's very close to my mouth. I was saying the very last sentence where it reads, the board is committed to interrupting systemic racism. The word interrupting doesn't work for me. I would like to change it to ending. But that, again, it's a quibble with the word choice. The concept I support. I like everything in the board values section. I think it.
You say derailing.
What's that?
You could say derailing.
Derailing. Yeah.
A little more visible.
I think when I think about these reflection questions, this captures for me everything that we have discussed so far. And it's going to be hard putting a draft out of anything like this. The community is going to feel uncomfortable. But I'm okay with this with some of the word changes that we've discussed. I feel like this encompasses what we've talked about as a board. I think it's our job to now hear from the community. Director Stewart?
I'd like to suggest, just in the interest of readability, blocks of type, getting past 35 words in a lead paragraph is a sin. I'd like to suggest that we start the second paragraph at where it says the board believes. It's not.
What's that?
To me, it follows in natural order, and it has two separate thought lines to a degree, and I think it works better.
Was that to move the second paragraph to be the first paragraph? At least the first sentence?
Look at the first paragraph. Go down to sentence 3. The board believes that each student. That should be the beginning of a new second paragraph. And then, so you end up having 3 paragraphs in the board values.
So in looking through, I think I think you can tighten it some. I would agree that I think we have the values in place, and I think what you're speaking to is trying to tighten it up a little bit. There is a repetition in the second sentence in the second paragraph. It actually is the same as what's in the first paragraph. We value the diversity that exists among our students. That's very similar to the board recognizes and celebrates this. So I think you can bring that together, and then looking at what value do you lead with, I think is sort of what you're saying. And if kids are our focus, there is a piece in which to be able to put that forward.
I think that it's kind of an overarching value, and then you can do the sub-values, if you will, or the component values in a subsequent paragraph there. It's just that trying to get folks to start reading a document that is over 72 words long, for some reason, it's psychologically blocking.
Does anyone think anything is missing from, I appreciate the desire for conciseness. Does anyone think anything is missing, though, from the board values section?
May I ask a clarifying question about interrupting? It's usually in a lot of meetings that address equity and training and innovation, interrupting is used as a verb. So I just wanted to point out that that is a very commonly used word.
The challenge we're facing is audience, and my assumption is that this is being written for a naive audience. As such, even though it's maybe standard in some of the trainings, I think that using language that is clear in any context. I mean, honestly, I interrupt people all the time, but I don't ever stop. So I do feel good about ending. That said, I'm actually seeing something that gives me great hope about this whole thing, in that we're diving into wordsmithing and tweaking things. That's the level that we should be at before we're taking this public. I'm not seeing any major things missing certainly in the board values. I think the overall structure at this point is sound, but I think each of us probably gets 2 or 3 stars to put on, here's a word that I need to change, because I've got 2 that I need to change, and they're not on the discussion yet. And it's not for me that I need to change the meaning of the sentence, it's that I need to change the grammar of the sentence. So I will pass the talking stick.
I appreciate what Chris is saying. And I understand, Sandra, where you're coming from. It's the language of the training and so forth. But what I'd like to be able to do, and I'd like to be able to do in other documents, to be quite frank, is that we break out of education ease. Every industry has a jargon. Heaven knows journalism did. Science has a jargon that only a few scientists understand. They're still arguing about it. But still, it doesn't play well with the parents, I don't think. You look at the complaints that came in about the various updates, and they're going, say what? What did this mean? And they were having trouble because they weren't in that flow of, it's not a criticism of being in that mode, because that's your industry. That's your upbringing. That's your career. But we need to realize that there's a lot of folks out there that are in IT, that are in, all sorts of careers. That God knows IT has enough buzzwords in it that could kill a person. And I think that's the problem, that when it gets that dense with either the actual jargon words or the phraseology in jargon, then you start having problems with people, 1, understanding, or 2, misunderstanding, or 3, just giving up.
Chris, you want to go ahead and give your line edits? No?
Well, yeah, so my most important edit on the board values is that the 2 paragraphs are backwards. The first sentence of the second paragraph is fundamentally the board values. And that, I think, is what you have to lead with, and then you get to the here's why. I really don't, I think that it's all here, it's just that the order matters in terms of just getting it out there. You start with, this is our statement, and I think that is the most important statement in the entire document. Okay, so setting that one aside, my 2 word edits, it's actually in policy background, so the next section, first sentence. Limited opportunity and access to many students. That too is a problem because you don't have access to students. It's access for the students or access to something else, and we need to fix it. So that two's either got to become a 4 or it's got to become 2 educational opportunities. I don't know what it, but that's a problem. The beginning of the second sentence, with predictability, students from these groups. Well, students from many of these groups have experienced disproportionately lower educational outcomes, but that's not necessarily universal, and I would prefer to just put in students from many of these groups. Because we just called out race as a generic concept. We didn't call out the racial groups that have experienced discrimination. So those are the only 2 pieces that I feel passionately I'd like to wordsmith into this. Other than that, and swapping the first 2 paragraphs.
Do you have a suggestion for your second part there?
Yeah, so for the second part there is just with predictability, students from, and between from and these, just add many of these. From many of these groups have experienced disproportionately lower educational outcomes. Because, we talked about gender and sexual orientation. Well, frankly, wow, there's one actually missing here, and that's just plain old sex. I mean, gender is separate from sex in my world. I don't know if it is in this world. But discrimination against women is something I don't think is covered here. And I want to make sure that we don't accidentally overlook that, despite the fact that we're doing pretty well in that department. Not a huge gap. Okay, I'm done.
Anyone have anything else on the board values section? Or any responses to anything anyone else has said?
Is there broad agreement around switching paragraph 2 and 1?
So, yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. Director Carlson's proposal was to just flip the 2 paragraphs?
Yeah, you can basically flip the 2
It
of
would
them.
read with, it would start with the board takes an unwavering stand.
It's
against-
leading with the board value rather than leading with a sentence that's just a statement of fact. And if this is the board values section, lead with the values. Yeah.
And so I would agree, but I think you do have to edit that paragraph then in order for it to fit with the first one, and you might find that those can meld completely. Should also say appreciate all the work that's been done. It is much tighter and clearer, and I think it's helpful as we're able to walk through this. So I would like to second Director Carlson's comments that it is good that we are at this stage.
It's great to have a team around me who will set aside time to be able to really dive into this because we essentially did the same type of activity to rewrite, really think about the words, and so it's helpful to hear your comments around this as well, and we'll go through that same process with this feedback as well.
And I do actually want to ask this question to the rest of the board. Like I said, in science, we treat sex and gender as 2 separate things. One's your chromosomes, the other's how you define yourself. Is that something you agree that we should call out separately, that sex and gender should both be explicitly in that sentence?
I have no problem with it. I think you can even go sex/gender. That way it all kind of fits together so we realize we're talking about 2 very closely united terms and issues, but not completely one. I mean, if that helps any.
And that's all right. I mean, I'm actually happy to be overruled if...
No, I agree. But I think we put a comment and add it.
Okay. I'm with that.
Yeah.
I think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to talk about the flipping the paragraphs in board values.
Do that.
Okay. I guess my opinion is I think I agree. I guess the concept that Director Carlson was putting forward is to start more with a values statement, I guess, right?
Less
And then,
preamble.
and then the, what, okay. I think that makes sense to me. It's one of those things I think I'd have to see side by side to, okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
The only other piece that I would consider adding up to the board values is the last sentence under the policy background. The board recognizes that by addressing racial disparities, all students will be better served by a more just educational system. That seems a stronger statement to be able to follow up as opposed to a background, but really as a value statement.
And so this is partially in jest, but not entirely. I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma. Okay, so I've got at least one thumbs up over there. We've got a few things here where the last thing doesn't have an Oxford comma on it, and I think that does actually make it read better. So, but if, again, I'm happy to be overruled if we're not fans of the Oxford comma.
It depends on what our Lake Washington School District style guide tells us.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Well, it also plays into the length of the list too, whether or not you use it, so, or the complexity of the list. If it's phrases as opposed to single words and it's only 2 or 3 versus 10.
Toss commas everywhere, that's what I say.
You know, if you want the simplistic kind of input from just someone who writes in a very simplistic manner for as in journalism, I'll be more happy to take a whack at this, but I don't think you'll probably like it as well. Because try and get it down to non-institutionalese.
Well, and I know that's helpful, and I think that's what we want to hear tonight too from everyone. And so if anyone has any just sort of line edits,
It wouldn't be the first time I've been called simple-minded.
say it again.
We're not calling anyone simple-minded. I appreciate trying to make it readable, because this is
Yeah,
a very important one for it to be readable.
I agree.
So I think we've tackled most of the line items or things that I had noticed might be an issue, but I am very curious about, let's talk about, are we ready to talk about to be determined? The policy title at the top?
Yeah, sure. No, that's good. Let's jump to that now. And then I have some more thoughts on the values. But yeah. Yeah, Chris, what do you want the title to be?
Well, again, I'm Mark's experience in journalism is important here. This is a headline, and to me, the headline has to be concise, and yet it has to be accurate. So, to me, it's an equity policy, and if we start listing what dimensions we care about equity, it winds up being red herrings that, oh, this is only about that dimension of equity. So, I would personally prefer an equity policy to be the title, and that's it. But again, it's something where I know that we didn't agree on this last time, and I'm curious about what we can do about it.
Depending on where you want to go, I think equity and inclusion, because we're talking about not just having equity to people, but including them in all this, no matter whether it's a race issue, whether it's an ability issue, whether it's whatever issue, to include everyone in one group. Now, if you want to be really picky about a headline, you'll need to have a verb there, but that's beside the point. If you just want to have a title, equity and inclusion, I think works.
And yeah, I'm totally down with equity and inclusion. That I think would be great.
You could even say equity and inclusion serves all.
It sounds very similar to the discussion we had 2 weeks ago in regards to the title. And so I guess I would still say I have my concerns by not having race called out. I do think that is an important factor. If you actually look at the impacts over the last week as to what has been happening in our community, or not, well, our world, I think there is still time that this needs to be called out. And I'm not sure it's as specifically called out here as strongly as I think it could be. I think it is, but not level it could. And I think having it in the title provides some of that.
And that's my concern, is making this too timely. I would rather have an equity and inclusion policy that's timeless, so that if we're talking about what breaks next year, I mean, right now I'm not saying that race is not important. It is very important. But if we put race in the title, it becomes a race policy. And people who are looking for equity in other dimensions have to know to look underneath the race policy to find their equity policy for LGBTQ or all these other dimensions. And that, I have a problem with putting a label on it that makes it look like this is the only thing that's going to be in there.
Then I would argue we shouldn't be listing out everything either in the policy background of all the different components there, because there are many we have not considered.
Well, I think you have to call out at least a beginning list with the idea that, and say that this is nowhere near an exhaustive list. You could even throw that in.
If we're going to go to a broad, you can say background characteristics and other components there to put it into a broader so it has more capacity to be timeless.
So, okay, we got 3 options that have
Yeah.
been discussed that we can go forward with this on. We can go to the community with a to be determined.
Yes.
We can go with, I think the other idea that was put forward was titling it equity and inclusion policy. Or, I actually don't want to put words in your mouth, Director Blazer, but I think your policy title, if I remember back from 2 weeks ago, would have been a race and equity policy.
I believe it landed at race, equity, and inclusion policy, if
3.
I'm not mistaken.
Okay. Maybe that was my own title then. Okay, but I'll sign on to yours. So then I guess there are 3 options. We can go forward with one of those 3 to the community. We're not, by picking any of the 2 today, we're not settling on it. But the question is, what, if anything, do we want in the draft that we ask for input on?
I think you've hit it very nicely, that if we took this to the community with options, rather than a set title on it, but here are the options we are looking at. I am perfectly willing to listen to the community on their feedback on this matter.
So maybe we have, I don't know how you indicate that, but these are proposed draft
May I
Policy
also
made.
suggest
titles.
that we've already had, within just 5 people, quite a wide range of opinions on only a few lines and words. Do you want to try and figure out how many thousands of editors you want to have go through this, or hundreds, or dozens? Basically, you get a racehorse turned into a camel by a committee. That's how you come up with one.
And that's an interesting question, because that's how do we take to this community? Because
Yeah.
inviting everyone to be simultaneously editing, that leads to version-itis.
Well, not only that, but if you don't want, if you want to ask their opinion, then you have to respect their opinion and take all their opinions, or at least a good portion of them, or else they feel like, oh, that was just lip service.
So the question comes to, what's the purpose of bringing it back to the community linkage, and what are we hoping to gain from doing so? I would think being able to, a title is a big component. Here's what we were, and here we are stuck on things. Let's hear the feedback at that. What works for what resonates with our community from a variety of perspectives, and have that opportunity. I think as you walk through the document, that's another ballgame of how that gets structured and how we seek that feedback. It should not be wordsmithing. It should be at the level that we were working on content and value. And did we miss something?
Yeah.
Or did we think we said something clearly and really we are so off base, it's not even close?
Yeah, I agree.
So with that, I'm not concerned about bringing it out to the community from
No.
that level. I think that's the right way, because for us to have missed something is really, really likely.
And as long as expectations are set, this isn't about where the comma goes. This is about, have we missed pieces? Is there important stuff we've missed, overlooked, underemphasized? Have we got this close to right? That's the feedback we're looking for. We're not
Yeah.
looking for,
Well, and we're looking for feedback through the linkages, am I correct?
Right, exactly,
As opposed
through
to
the
just sending
linkages,
this
yeah.
document out and say, hey, what do you think?
right,
That leads to chaos.
yeah. I agree.
I may have some more, I actually don't really want to do that right now. I may have some more edits to the board value statement later, but I actually don't feel like that would be, that's constructive right now. Or at least it's not necessary for this phase of getting a draft out. I feel okay with the changes made that were discussed today, with putting it forward, and I feel okay knowing that we may have some more changes to make the language tighter and work better. But for me, it at least conveys the values that I would like to right now. Anyone else have anything else on the board values section? Then we've sort of touched on the policy background section. We can move to that next. I'm going to say one more thing on the board values section. And one of the reasons I liked Chris's proposal of flipping the second and the first paragraph is that now I do think we have heard from the community that it's important to talk about race in this policy. And by switching it, the very first sentence is talking about race and racism in our schools. And I think that's an important message to have in a policy. I think the first sentence is important. And I like that switch for that reason. Okay, I don't have any comments in the policy background section. Does anyone else?
Are we going to discuss the directive at all?
Yes, we'll do that next.
I'm ready to discuss the directive.
Okay, we'll do that now. Dr. Carlson, you want to go first?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm very pleased with this. I know this is the area where I think it's most likely there will be a gap that the community will call to our attention. I personally have been through this enough times that I have the blind spot you get on your fifth draft. I can't see anything missing anymore, but that doesn't mean there's nothing missing. I do want to thank you guys. I absolutely love your cross-refs into the other OEs. So that is near and dear to my nerdy heart, so it's well done.
I also want to stress, too, that as much as we've nitpicked words, or we've wordsmithed here, and we've said this goes there and so forth, it in no way diminishes the effort went in to get this far. It's hell to start when the page is blank. It's easier to edit. I've always said I was a better editor than I was a writer. And that's because you're already starting with something, and you have to create it. So I want to tell everyone that's involved with this, good going so far, let's keep on going.
Dr. Holman, a clarifying question. Is the idea that there will be a link in the final draft that, when it goes up on board docs, will it be a link to cross-reference, or what is your thinking in terms of the parentheticals with the cross-reference?
Yeah, so that was based on request at the last board meeting. I don't believe we actually cross-referenced the rest of our OEs
Yeah.
in this manner, and so this would be something new within our policy structure. I don't think it would be too difficult to provide links within the policy. It probably is dependent on board docs, and but I'm thinking that's available. So to me, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
helpful in terms of me just reviewing it this as a draft. It was helpful to see, and but I do wonder what does it accomplish in the final? Yeah, Director Stewart.
I think it accomplishes this, that when, and I think it applies not just to this OE, but I think that starting with this one, we should start thinking about having a section like that for each one of them, because as you start to try and weed through them again, if it's OE, whatever, and you say, wow, did we miss anything? Did we mention it already in any other part? Is there anything that can draw these policies all together to show how interwoven our values and our judgments are? I think having that for future, I won't say generations, but future boards, I think would be very helpful, future staff for that matter, when they all of a sudden 20 years from now have to redo whatever. It's always great to be able to have that, and I think by leaving it in with the actual policy is also helpful to the public when they look at it, and they'll see that this isn't just a one-off statement, or when they go to the reference, they'll say, oh, I now have it in context. And I didn't quite understand it there, but that helps color it out.
I broadly agree with that. My only fear is I don't want to metastasize into cross-referencing every other OE becomes something that gets in the way of this. But it's definitely something I'd like to encourage in the future.
I don't have an opinion. I guess it would help us, would make sure that if we had a cross-reference, then we would have to make sure we were monitoring them consistently too. We're not saying different things in one OE than another. I have no feedback on the directive at this point.
Can I just comment real quick? What was interesting for me in cross-referencing, it really shows the expansive nature of our race and equity work. Yeah. It really is infused really across almost all of the OEs. Like there's some OEs that just don't lend themselves to some of this risk and things like that. But, really, if you look at it, it's, I believe, OE 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11. I mean, that really is expansive across the board's policies, which it should be. And so I think it also demonstrates that.
I think it shows, too, that we're not talking about a 2021, 2020 thing, that suddenly the scales fell from our eyes, that this has been in our policies, just hasn't been all drawn together.
Yeah. Director Sage?
On some of the directives, I assume we're not going to go point by point through these.
Well, you can if you want.
No, I don't, but I have a few I want to draw out. Is it my turn? That's what I'm really asking. So 14.5, maintain a collaborative school culture. I feel like maintain seems kind of like status quo. Strengthen and maintain, ensure and maintain, something that indicates we're not going to settle for whatever that means in the current state. We're going to evolve. 14.8 talks about professional development on inclusive learning environments. Do we state somewhere that all staff will have racial equity training?
So when you think of the next step in this process, so once the board adopts OE 14, then the next step after that is superintendent interpretation and indicators. And so as I was thinking about it, that's the next level that the board is then evaluating, saying, okay, is the superintendent interpreting these consistent with the board's values? And so I guess that's where I was anticipating that pieces such as training and whatnot being a little more explicit would come.
The reason this came to my mind is because I've had several questions this year regarding what kind of training do staff members receive? Mm-hmm. And I wasn't able to answer what kind or how much or if all staff members receive equity training. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it would be bad to call it out. So the public sees this is mandatory for staff. This isn't something that some people get and some people don't.
So will you make do you have an offer of language that you're thinking about?
Well, just like 14.8, provide professional development, I think require equity training.
So is it the provide piece that's because provide is a passive,
Yeah.
it's an offering that with no expectation. Is that the piece?
Yeah, I guess it is. So require professional development for staff focused on safe, equitable, and inclusive learning environments.
Gotcha.
I just know this is a question that, people have right now, and I can certainly understand why.
This is an interesting piece where here in darn it, what are we calling these? The directives. I had been hesitant to sign on to Siri's notion of just not listing the dimensions. The dimensions aren't mentioned explicitly, no single one of them here. That said, this is a place I could handle having a specific call out for racial sensitivity training. Or racial equity training, because this is something that is typically, when you get into that level of specificity in writing them, you're either trying to put tighter bounds on your superintendent and their administration, or you're trying to make it explicit for the community to see. I could live with that, absolutely, even though I wouldn't need to call out any other dimensions, but it's not and I would actually make it its own. 14.8 is professional development on safe, equitable, and inclusive learning environments, and then the next one would be provide racial equity training. I mean, specifically calling out racial equity, potentially as a subset of it, but making sure that they're two separate statements.
So here's a potential example.
Okay.
Provide professional development, training, and engagement opportunities to inform and practice cultural competence and increase awareness of personal and systemic bias and inequities in teaching, counseling, advising, and coaching practice. It's a little long, as well as in discipline, staff, student interactions, and staff and parent interactions.
Wow.
This is from Issaquah's equity policy, actually, that I was taking that, but that seems to fit with what you're thinking.
Yes, but I would take out provide and require, just so people know it's a stated expectation of the board that this will occur.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with swapping the word require for provide. I'm not sure. Director Carlson hit the nail right on the head about, with drafting these policies, it's like what level of granularity, how prescriptive do we want to be? And I don't know the answer to that yet, what I think. I think that I do support changing required to provide, but I just don't know how we want to, I don't know that if we want to peel out another dimension there. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, 14.8.1 could just be as an example of 14.8. So 14.8, you phrase it in a way that is agnostic to which dimension we're talking about. 14.8.1 explicitly calls that as an example, require racial equity training.
Well, so I think I disagree, I think. I think it's
Okay.
either we say we're going to require it or we don't. It's either,
Yeah, okay.
at 14.9, we do it or I don't know, I just,
Okay.
I believe provide means require.
well,
well,
maybe.
That would be the metric we would utilize in which to provide, is that it was done.
It was provided.
Well, there's an opt-in piece to that, though. Provide kind
Yeah.
of sounds like it's optional.
I provide vegetables to my children.
But they don't necessarily eat them?
Yes.
Well, and then the question comes up, how much do you provide? And it's been stated by some staff that they don't feel there's enough training provided.
Absolutely, and then that's held through the monitoring report.
Yeah.
So that's the piece.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to say is the more explicit the board is in this portion of the policy, then the board becomes accountable for that. And so that's always the balance. And was it Chris who said you get specific to either tighten down on the superintendent, or you said something else, and I don't disagree with those.
Signaling to the community, yeah.
Right. And so, so whether it's explicitly called out here, or whether through the process of superintendent interpretation and indicators, that's within that piece as well, the board will have a voice, because that has to be approved by the board. And so,
But
I
where does the
understand it.
community see it?
Pardon me?
But the community would have to be really paying attention to see it at that level, I think.
And this becomes the challenge of switching, I want to call it code switching between speaking about policy with people who are in the policy,
Right.
as opposed to communicating policy to the community. And to me, that's really where the board value statement has really important things in it. I mean, sort of turning it around, if we've got someone who comes and wants to search through our documents and says, have you got something on gender or on gender identity? Well, if you don't have the words gender identity in the document somewhere, they're not going to find the relevant section. So I do think it's important to include that in the board value statement. But in terms of the superintendent will, that's getting down to the nitty-gritty of how we interact with the superintendent and the staff. So to me, that we can leave at a higher level, just because, and I can live with trying to explain to someone who really wants to get into that nitty-gritty, but this is more operational to me than outward-facing.
Well, should it be stated as a board value then, in the introductory paragraph?
No,
I'm on board, I've decided I'm on board with Director Sage on this. I would like to add a 14.9.
A 14 point whatever, a directive, I'm actually on board with that as well. Just making it in addition to these rather than morphing one of the existing ones into it.
And then I just have one more thing. On 14.9, maintain family engagement. I again think that sounds a little passive, so ensure family engagement that recognizes the diverse makeup of students and families and provides active and meaningful participation.
How about ensure and continue to build? Because ensure and continue to build, because there are some folks who would say that we need to build a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had additional comments on that one, of trying to broaden what the idea of the meaningful participation was. It wouldn't only be in the child's school success, but it would also be in school and community in general, that we should be seeking out diverse perspectives on any of our implementing strategies. So develop and implement strategies for effective partnerships between home, school, and school districts, seeking out diverse perspectives. I don't want to limit it to the child, because that isn't always what it is. It tends to be broader than that.
That's a good point, and it speaks to the action that we expect to see.
So I just think it'd be strengthened to be a little broader about that piece. And then I believe I'd like to see something in there about extracurricular activities and student well-being.
In what is currently 14.9?
No, as a new,
As another,
it'd be another. In regards to equitable access and inclusiveness in regards to our school activities, clubs, and athletics, as that's another big component of what occurs within our schools, and of belonging. I think of that through our linkage sessions, that was a big component I kept hearing.
I think it's a good
Along
idea
those
to call
lines,
that out.
along the lines of what Sherry's saying, perhaps we ought to be looking at, we've said that about our extracurriculars, we've also said it about our choice schools. And so this may be the time to really focus in on that, to say, look, that this is the time that we're going to look at how choice school populations created, making sure they're diverse, making sure that everyone has the opportunity. It's one thing to say they're open to everyone, and it's another thing to say, how am I going to get there?
So I think it's potentially into 14.4, there's a piece of a component there with educational opportunities, that could be more specific. I guess this is where my concern would be of being too broad, then we have to work through the metrics a little bit, where right now we know these sorts of things. So are we more targeted specifically in what we say?
I agree. I mean, I'm wrestling with how do we do that for providing access to not just extracurricular but program, and I'm thinking more than just choice schools, but actually Quest, and yeah, exactly. But then it becomes a matter of the metastasis of how many dimensions are we going to specify explicitly. So but at the same time, I've been worrying about this one as long as I've been on the board, and certainly as long as Siri's been on the board. And so providing equitable access to program is something I wouldn't mind calling out explicitly, in addition to the more generic educational opportunities. So it's not replacing 14.4, it's just a 14-point Y. And, and programs, I can work with that, yeah.
No opinion on that right now.
But again, I see this as, at this point, we really are, I would not be embarrassed to take this forward for public input on, is this understandable? Are there gaps? How are we doing with this? Because at this point, we do need to move forward on adopting the darn thing. And being able to do that we still do need to do the public feedback before we adopt it. But I think we're ready to go to the next stage with this. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. Any other comments on, anything in the policy? Okay. Do you have any questions, Dr. Holman? And then if not, could you give us some
I
rundown
do
of
have
next steps?
one more question for the board, but I also, in thinking about this, I wonder if we just want to set 30 minutes aside on Saturday just to do one final look at this, knowing that we have a study session on Saturday. And was that a reminder? Sorry. And that was not a passive reminder. That was just calling out. What I really want is for the board to feel really good about, because this is your policy. Even though we take it and we do work, this is the board's policy. And so any work we do is truly to provide support for the board to have the best absolute policy you can have to take to the community. And so if we were able, we send an additional draft, Thursday evening and or Friday, the board has a chance to read it, come back. If there's anything glaring that's missing, then we could address it then, and then we can get it out to community so that they have it in time for linkages and have a chance to review it.
I'm okay with that, but only if it's raining. Then I'll come. I'm kidding, I'll be there.
53, and there will be showers on Saturday. That's what my Como app says.
That's a great idea.
And so there's one additional question that, and maybe, or two questions, and maybe these aren't for tonight, and maybe this is just something for the board to think about, but what learning will the board need to support this policy after adoption, and what practices or experiences will the board need to support this policy after adoption? And so I think it's an important aspect. It was something that we talked about today in cabinet, knowing that, getting to this point and adopting, it's that's great. And there's additional learning, engagement, perspectives that the board inherently, because you'll start to receive questions from community about this. And so that's just something that I want to either talk about tonight or add to another conversation.
Well, I would say along with staff that the board needs to continue with equity training and learning. This is not a one and done thing.
Yeah, sorry, Director Carlson? No, okay. I would say we still are going to complete the equity training that we've been ongoing, but I think having that in our work plan is probably something that we need to do as part of continuing to think about this policy and monitor it correctly.
I think we're going to need to continue linking and connecting with our community on a more regular basis around these issues and being able to have these conversations so we can be forward-looking. So I do see that being a component to build in.
Second,
Also including our students, when we have the advisory groups, how will this feed back to them? And then how do we continue to build learning what their experiences are within our schools and hear from them in a more direct fashion?
So as we move forward, it's for public input on this and then adoption, I'm hoping that to some extent you're able to move in parallel on the interpretation, such that it's not that you have to pretend that you waited until after we formally adopt that you prepare the interpretation. That's something that would happen fairly rapidly. Because to me, the other thing beyond our further development is I'm really curious about what we can, how do we know how we're doing and are we doing better? I mean, how do we monitor this? And that's something values are hard to, these are values that are harder to monitor than average, but I definitely want to make sure that they are part of it.
Second, I got that. That's great. Great point.
Chris, will you be more specific? So when you say,
Sorry, so the next step after we adopt it is technically for you to bring back the superintendent's interpretation so that we can then agree on, yes, we accept or reject your interpretation. I presume at this point we'd be able to accept it, but really the interpretation is going to get beyond where we're trying to state our values, and it's really about what are we doing, how are we addressing, how are we interpreting that as, when we give you 14.8, professional development for staff, well, I interpret this to mean, and here are the metrics by which, in order for us to hold the system accountable, that's a critical step. And to me, it's something that is rapidly critical, that if we adopt this, say, in a month or 2 months, as long as we adopt this before the end of the school year, hopefully coming into the next school year, we've already gotten to the point where we have an interpretation to measure it by.
thank you, that was the clarity I was looking, because I was thinking, because we'll do linkages, we'll get feedback from that, the board will have another discussion, we'll finalize that draft, go through the policy adoption process, and really that puts us into June. So my thought was have the interpretation and indicators completed, board adopted by end of August, so that as we enter into the school year, we have that, and then we have the year to conduct and monitor that policy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'd like to see happen as well.
And I am pretty sure I have nothing left.
additional learning for the board? Any thoughts?
No, I've gotten to the point where I've got a blind spot where I need help finding it. I'm not going to tell you what learning I need. I need someone to help me figure out what learning I need. I'm sorry.
That's fair.
Okay.
And I think the only other thing I would add would be thinking about timing of monitoring of this policy for next year, potentially early enough in the year so then the board can engage in a cycle around this specific policy for review, dialogue, and potential updates, just knowing that this is a brand-new policy, and each time we've modified the policies, a year later, we wonder, why did we do that in the policy? And so just being really, specific in the work plan for next year of when we monitor, and then put that in the cycle for the board to engage in dialogue, probably go back to community and do a piece of this as a cycle.
John, to your point of why did we do this, if someone looks back 10 years or whatever, there may be a good reason to put a, why was this all brought under one under umbrella? And I think, to be quite frank, we probably got a few other policies. Why did we update it at this point? What was the, did the technology change so we had to adopt a new policy? Did a pandemic come along that really put remote learning on its ear? So I think that it really probably wouldn't hurt for our OEs. Now, granted, like you said, risk management, well, it's so you don't get your tail sued off, but anyway, I think of why for any kind of your OEs, really, when it comes down to it. Why this time, or why at this time? What sparked it?
It's like a running record. Like a running record of policy, yeah.
So as I think about the learning piece even more, is sort of thinking along the lines of, again, it's going back to sort of what are our students' experiences within their schools, and how do we pull that out so that we start to understand those pieces? What are the experiences of our families, and how that changes, and how do we respond more effectively to that? So I do think some of that is the other piece of the learning that comes in trying to figure those pieces out in order to be able to support this policy to its best.
I think the board is aware of your next steps, and that it is all we have for study session this evening.
Okay, great. So we'll take another look at this Saturday morning.
Sounds good.
Okay. Glad I had that on my calendar. Okay, so there are no other items on the agenda. So this April 19th study session is now adjourned. The board, we have our business meeting starting at 7, so 45 minutes.